evening, and thank you for joining us. I am still covering the alcohol, or we're starting our alcohol series tonight. Um, why people drink. This part of the series the series begins with a socio-political perspective. What does that mean? That means that we are taking a look at history, and trying to understand our alcohol-related problems today in contemporary society. And we do that by taking a look, even going back to ancient times, and understanding the use of alcohol um, throughout the generations and how we have gotten to the point today, what the social implications of that use points to in our society today, and how we use it, how we consume it, and the problems that are associated with it. So that's kind of where we are tonight. We're going to take a little history lesson, so to speak. We're going to discuss not just the history of alcohol, but also the chemical process of manufacturing or production of alcohol. We're going to explore some of the societal views at various points and times in history that ultimately is responsible, again, for how we consume and abuse uh, alcohol and other psychoactive substances for that matter. So we're gonna start there. We're talking about um, the basically history in terms of the use of alcohol is where we're starting. Alcohol use dates back at least somewhere between 7,000 8,000 BC, and um, ancient societies used alcohol for all sorts of reasons, whether it was spiritual rituals to communicate with ancestors, uh, ceremonial rituals, marriages, births, funerals or memorials and things like that. Alcohol was used to swear in kings and to take an oath of office. It was also used for medicinal purposes to relieve pain, as analgesics to clear up infections, and many other reasons. That is just a brief synopsis of some of the uses that they in ancient times for alcohol. And so it's kind of similar to what we do today if we think about it. So yeah, so one of the things that we want to point out tonight is, well, let me show you this because I did do some charting as usual. And so when we look at the early use of alcohol, it's a worldwide thing. It's not just something, it didn't start in just the Americas, but it is said that the Native Americans were using alcohol when Columbus arrived. That was something that was already in use. At one point in time, people, probably because of contamination and things like that, people preferred to drink alcohol more than water. So yeah, so alcohol has been in use a very long time. But here's a few that I was able to find anyway of early use of alcohol. So in the Paleolithic age, I believe, well, it is said that they used the term mead, MEAD. This is supposedly the oldest alcoholic beverage, which was made from honey. Neolithic humans referred to it as booze. Beer and berry wine was used in 6400 BC. Grape wine between 3 and 400 BC. And like I said, it is said that beer was used by Native Americans when Columbus arrived here. So So alcohol has been around forever. And so, what we want to take a look at today is the process for making alcohol. This is in all alcohol it's basically only two forms of beer and two forms of wine, and then you have distilled spirits. So, the fermentation process is the basis for all alcohol. Period. It all starts with the fermentation process. Fermentation is also responsible for our standard of 12% alcohol concentration in wine. Now, beer is a little different. Beer in American standards is usually between 3 and 4% alcohol. In fact, during the Temperance era, um, and we're going to talk about that some more. Um, Beer was socially acceptable because it contained less, it had a much lower alcohol content in beer. And so the upper society at a particular time before and during the Depression era around 19, the early 1900s, the early part of the 19th century, um, beer was the preferred drink. Even religious clergymen and things like that advocated for the use of beer over wine because of, again, of the lower alcohol concentration. So, but we're talking about the alcohol production process. So, fermentation is the basis for all alcohol production. And you'll have to excuse me because I don't know, this is a refresher course for me. It's been a long time since I had to study this. But so basically, fermentation is a chemical process of certain yeast acting on sugars. And basically, what happens is, um, certain types of yeast, not any, there are specific types of yeast that is used in the production of alcohol. That yeast basically is mixed with sugar or added to a mixture of sugar and water, and the yeast converts the sugars, acts on the sugars, and converts it to ethyl alcohol and carbon dioxide by recombining the carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen from the sugar, if that makes any sense. So, okay, so that's the basic process of creating alcohol. And then they have different things that they can do to make it stronger, make it lighter. A lot of folks like to drink light beer, but the light beer is only lighter in calories, not the alcohol concentration. So that's important to know as well. So when you're talking about the production of alcohol, you're talking about yeast being added, again, certain types of yeast being added to a mixture of sugar and water, or you can use crushed grapes and things like that. And that is what begins the fermentation process. The yeast, however, has a low tolerance for the alcohol. So when the concentration, when that mixture reaches a point of 15% concentration, the yeast dies off and the fermentation stops. That's why we have a standard of alcohol content for wine at 12%. It's because of the fermentation process. Okay? I hope that makes sense. Um, then, uh, as far as beer is concerned, again, like I said, commercial American beer. Now, this is our standards. I don't know about other countries. Um, Only contains about a 4% alcohol concentration, and so that's basically it. Um, Most American beer is made from barley. Cereal grains also can be used as well. Let me put the chart back up because I think some of this information is on here. Um, Beer is made from barley, but the grains contain starch. The starch in the barley has to first be converted to sugar. So there's a whole process for that. Then it goes back through the same thing, and they make something called a malt or whatever. But regardless, then it goes to the general process of the yeast, I mean, the barley and being added to a mixture of sugar and water and so on and so forth. So that's the basic procedure or process for the production of alcohol. Now, um, of course, grain based beverages, as we're talking about, which is the basis for beer. They also can use cereal grains, but beer is made from barley, essentially. And it has a lower sugar content, which is why the alcohol concentration is lower in beer. So you basically have two types of beer. Let me put the chart back up. The two basic forms of beer is ale and lager. I'm not sure if I am pronouncing it correctly. Those are the two basic forms. We generally drink the lager, which is the light beer. And then as far as wines is concerned, and of course that there's the 4% alcohol content that's general in beer. Sometimes it's a little less, 3.2% or whatever, but basically between 3 and 4%. Wine, there's two basic forms of wine: generics and varietals. That and those are 12% alcohol. Then you have distilled spirits, your whiskey and things like that. That can be as high as 40 to 50% alcohol. And if you look at the top of the chart, where under processes for making alcohol, you can see uh, there I have listed that the fermentation process is responsible for the 12% standard of alcohol content in wine. We talked about that. Distillation, this is the process that it creates the alcohol it's used to uh, for for alcohol concentration above 15%. So remember, the yeast dies off because yeast only has a certain tolerance for um, the ethyl alcohol. That once the yeast converts the sugar to ethyl alcohol, then at a certain percentage, the yeast is going to die off, right? So there's another process called distillation. This process will is used for alcohol concentration above 15%. It was supposedly introduced to the Western world by Italians around the 10th century. It is also used for medical treatment. And then there's the fortification process. So that's a whole other process. I don't want to get into that because this is something I just want to give you the basic information, and anything that you want to go and research, you can do that. But the fortification process is the process used for creating or producing alcohol with a concentration of 20 to 25%. Now, it is very possible to make alcohol that is above these percentages. There's some alcohol that is even up to 50% alcohol concentration that I've seen. But again, I just want to give you the basics of it, and give you a general understanding of how beer and wine is produced and things like that, and some of the early uses of alcohol in ancient times. So, um, but I want to talk to you about proofs. So, when we talk about um, distilled beverages, they generally go by proof, 80 proof, 90 proof, 100 proof, things like that. Now, how you are to determine the alcohol concentration in a uh, in an alcoholic beverage uh, that is a distilled beverage, again, like whiskey and I believe brandy and some other ones. Um, you can determine the alcohol concentration by calculating half the proof amount. So a 100 proof bottle of liquor is basically a 45% alcohol concentration. That is a lot of alcohol. That's a strong drink. Okay. So that's important to know. When you see the a number for proofs on a bottle of liquor, calculate the alcohol concentration by half that number. I want to make sure that you guys get that. So if it's 100 proof, it's 50% alcohol concentration. If it's 90 proof, it's 45% alcohol concentration. 80 proof is 40% alcohol concentration. And this is only relative to distilled beverages, distilled alcohol beverages, not your traditional beers and wines, right? Beers and wines generally, uh, like I said, 4%, anywhere up to 4% for beer. 12% alcohol concentration is the general for wine, unless it is fortified. So certain wines do have a higher concentration, generally up to 20 to 25%. Now, it could be some wines that are stronger than that. I don't know. I'm giving you the information that I researched and that I am that I understand. So that's basically it. So let's talk about prohibition because we want to talk about um, different societal views um, that have translated down through generations and is responsible really for how we use, consume, and also abuse alcohol. So it kind of it started with the temperance movement. Now this was a time period where again upper society, generally middle class, uh, and your middle class and elites in American society decided that people were, they were not happy with the alcohol related problems, the public drunkenness, and all of that kind of stuff. And so what they did is they got together and they started a movement. Women's groups organized. Women couldn't even vote, but they were very powerful and instrumental during the temperance movement and prohibition as well. But before prohibition, there was the temperance movement. Okay, and what the temperance movement said is that distilled spirits in particular was causing the problems. Because remember, distilled spirits, if we look at the chart again, distilled spirits have the higher alcohol concentration, right? This is where you get off into your 80, 90, 100 proof liquor. So this is what they had a problem with specifically. So this is a movement that, these temperate societies wanted basically abstinence from specifically distilled spirits. They thought that they were toxic, inherently evil. The drinks now, and actually, they blamed the people rather, than the drink itself. But that's another story. But basically, this is what they were focusing on, and this is what the movement was all about. So it started there, and then during the second half of the 19th century is where you start getting off into the prohibition. Is attributed to a doctor. His name was Benjamin Rush. Benjamin Rush, essentially, he wrote a book because basically he was treating patients who was having a lot of health concerns and things like that, health problems as it relates to and he started studying these health conditions and attributing them to heavy alcohol use. They were going through, withdrawals and all of that kind of stuff. At that time, he was calling it madness. So he basically was saying not only is the alcohol destroying the body, is messing with people's mind as well. So he is essentially the father of the concept of addiction. Benjamin Rush was his name. He was a physician, and he is responsible for studying and doing and the research of psychoactive substances. So and as well considering alcohol addiction, disease, the disease concept of addiction as well. So this is important because this is how um, this whole process began. So he is again the start of what we know today as the Prohibition period, which came through the was enacted into um, law it under the 18th Amendment in 1920. So this is what happened. And so Maine was the first state to pass prohibition laws in 1851. 1855, 13 states had uh, uh, prohibition laws. By 1868, 9 had repealed them. Between 1880 and 1889, another 7 states adopted prohibition laws, and by 1896, 4 had repealed them. So what was happening? Views were changing again. They went from uh, the temperance movement that said distilled drinks, just stay away from distilled drinks, drink beer and wine if you're going to engage in out drinking alcoholic beverages. Don't drink the distilled drinks. They're evil. That they're the devil. They were the first. Alcohol was the first substance to be demonized in society. And this is where that came from. Those societal views at that time said that it was evil, that the beverage, alcohol beverage was evil. And it was causing people all kind of problems. It was keeping men in saloons away from their families, their wives, their children, and all of those types of things. And so this is what happened. They got to and then there was an influx of immigration in the country. They invented refrigeration. Then they started adding preservatives called hops to beer and things like that. And because what I'm getting ahead of myself, because what happened during the temperance movement, the breweries and stuff started closing down because they didn't have people were literally taking vows to abstain from specific types of drinks. So alcohol manufacturers were closing down. Well, then we got the country, we got refrigeration and all of that stuff. Preservatives for alcoholic beverages was being discovered. And then we got an influx of immigrants, the Italians and all of that, the Irish, that created a whole new customer base for liquor, especially beer, amongst some of these ethnic groups. And so now the breweries and all of that are reopening again. They're popping back up again. And then society started changing because even when the temperance movement gained traction, and people were in general across the country were abstaining, not totally from alcohol, but from, again, distilled drinks. The problems didn't stop. The hospitals that were treating people for alcohol related problems were not closing. Jails were not closing, and so they're saying this doesn't make any sense. It's not helping. So then there was a whole new movement of anti prohibition, you know, groups that started saying, we need to bring this back. In fact, let's go back to taxing it. And a lot of them were, again, your upper class, your uh, uh, corporate executives and things like that, people that own the means of production and the factories and all of that, that were saying, look, stop taxing us, bring the alcohol back and tax it. Because at one point in time, the government was relied very heavily on taxing alcohol. That was a big part of the federal budget, was the alcohol tax. Well, when during prohibition, of course, that went away, and so it put a burden on your upper classes and all of that, because I believe income taxes didn't start in this country until around 1913, I believe. So that this is what happened. So again, the national prohibition went into effect in January 1920 under the 18th Amendment. You had states that was passing prohibition laws. Some had passed them and repealed them, and it was going back and forth. So then the anti-prohibition movement started, because during prohibition you had this influx of immigrants who created another customer base for alcohol, and so the manufacturing plants were popping back up again, and again the problems didn't stop. It didn't make a significant difference, because and then people were still drinking. This is where your bootleggers and all of that, your Al Capones and all of that came into play, because that organized crime uh, got more organized and became exponentially profitable, just from the illegal consumption of alcohol. So this gave rise to crime, organized crime as well, when the country was under prohibition. That's important to mention. I don't want to forget to say that. So one of the ways to that, again, under the temperance movement, upper society says it's the distilled beverages that's causing the problems. You can still drink beer and wine, do it moderately, but the real problem is the distilled beverages. Even when I talked about Benjamin Rush, this is the physician, again, like I said, who essentially is credited as the father of the concept of addiction. He was actually, when he wrote his book about his medical research and studying people with alcohol related health conditions, disease, mental problems, and all of that, he was really targeting distilled beverages again. In particular, he really wasn't talking about beer and wine. But again, this is under the temperance movement. Well, then again, the immigrants came in, provided a whole new customer base. People were still drinking illegally. Then you had cough medicines and tonics and all of that stuff that had high alcohol concentration. Some of the cough medicines and stuff has somewhere upwards to 40% alcohol content in them. So people were drinking both legally and illegally. So prohibition didn't stop the drinking. It just made organized crime more organized and more profitable. So, but the reason why, and I want to say this, the reason why that these society, the upper echelon of society, even moved to prohibition, which was to the whole point was to outlaw. Got to a point that they wanted to completely outlaw alcohol. It was to get back at these immigrants. They felt like these people were coming in, they're low class, they got a different religion, they don't have any morals, and they're causing problems. So this is what prohibition was all about. It was really a way to strike back at immigrants. Okay? So, again, 18th Amendment, all of these states started coming on board, and at some point the whole country was under all the states was under prohibition laws except two. I want to say, was it Nevada and New York, I believe, were the two that refused to go under prohibition. I have to look it up again. I can't remember. But there were two states in particular that never did go under prohibition, even when it was national prohibition laws, or whatever. So that was under the 18th Amendment. Mississippi was the first to ratify it in January 1918. Nebraska was the 36th state to ratify in January 1919. And of course, national prohibition went into effect in January 1920. But again, the law didn't make any difference. It didn't result in any type of alcohol free society. People were still drinking legally and illegally. It gave rise to organized crimes. There was all kinds of issues, and it became expensive to, for law enforcement to enforce the laws. So we go through another shift. We go through another cultural shift in terms of our views in society towards alcohol, and this anti-prohibition movement started again amongst the elite, lawyers, doctors, business people, clergymen, educators, all of these types of folks that were either middle class or upper class citizens, uh, basically did the same thing they did when they asked to outlaw alcohol. Then they got together and said, we don't want to outlaw it anymore because it's not working. It's not doing us any good. And instead of the government taxing us, we can shift they can go back to taxing alcohol because people are still doing it anyway. So societal views. Let's stop here. We talk about in contemporary society, we talk about cancel culture and all of that kind of stuff. We have different little terminology, but it's the same thing. This is why marijuana today is being legalized all across the country because we have a society and societal views change from generation to generation. The current culture says it's nothing wrong with marijuana, and so now they're deregulating it, descheduling it. And this is what happened back then. There's nothing new under the sun. We do the same thing. Things just go in cycles. There's nobody who has come up with anything new. We do the same thing over and over and over again. That's why it's important to study history. People don't like history. And it can be boring. This one, going back and doing the research for tonight is, it was a struggle, because it can be, history can be a little daunting. However, what we don't, when we don't understand the past, we are, what we don't understand from the past, we are doomed to repeat. So it is important that we understand this basic, fundamental, rudimentary stuff, because what was is what will be, or is what was is what is, because we have the same issue, same problems going on from a century ago that's going on in society today. So this is important. So we talked about the taxation and all of that. They basically wanted to tax alcohol and give themselves some relief on their corporate and personal income taxes, the upper and middle class parts segments of society. So now, when we talk about prohibition, now what it did do, one of the benefits of prohibition is it did limit and reduce alcohol availability, in which are wet and dry states. Some of you have heard the terminology of certain states that are wet, certain states that are dry. Even today, I think places like, I think Mississippi is wet now, but it took them a long time to come on board. I think they were the last state, Mississippi, to go wet, meaning that they allow alcohol. Tennessee, I think some, well, but some portions, even in certain states, because after Prohibition, which was repealed under the 21st Amendment, national prohibition anyway, they turned over the regulation of alcohol back to the states, is essentially what happened. And, so when they did that, certain parts of the states still remain dry, even though the state itself maybe made alcohol legal, became wet, as they say. So, but then you have limited hours. I remember as a kid, some of you remember, I remember that you couldn't purchase alcohol on Christmas Day, and things like that. Certain times of the night or whatever, you could not purchase alcohol. So now you got liquor stores open. I think in Michigan we sell alcohol up to 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm not sure about other states. I have heard of some. Believe some states allow alcohol sales up to 4 o'clock in the morning and things like that. That can't be good. But at any rate, again, certain states remain dry after prohibition, and then even certain segments of within a state, certain counties and things like that. You go to certain states, the state might be wet, but certain counties in that state may still be dry. It's important to know that kind of stuff as you travel and things like that. So that's important. And so but this is all relative to systemic issues. I don't want that yet. When we look at systemic issues, we have to look at social norms. We have to look at geographical locations, whether it's wet or dry. We have to look at access. How many hours a day is alcohol sold? How far, things like that. These are all related to alcohol or relative to alcohol related problems that we deal with. Access, and again, how many hours a day that alcohol consumption is allowed in a particular state. Meaning, in other words, how late are the bars and things like that open. Then you got to look at state stress index. States that have a lot of high unemployment, business closer, business closures, and all of these types of things, lots of poverty, and all of those types of things, you're going to have more alcohol consumption and ultimately crime. So, this is important. These are the systemic factors in alcohol use. And this is what I'm saying. We have to understand these things before we even begin to deal with individual consumption, abuse, and all of independence and all of that stuff. This is the foundation of it. So then we look at subjective factors. We talked about some of this stuff last night: ethnicity, cultural norms, economic status, socialization, physical and mental health, family systems. There's all kinds of subjective reasons why people drink and abuse alcohol and become ultimately become dependent on it. And so this is what I wanted to talk about tonight. This is basically it. I just wanted to give you a general overview of the socio-political aspects of alcohol use, consumption, and abuse in the country. Where does this stuff come from? How we are socialized, what the social norms are. The culture determines the norms. What is deviant is determined by the culture at a given time and place. I have said this a zillion times on this channel. The culture determines the social norms because the culture decides what is deviant and what is not deviant. At one particular time, certain things, again, like I said, there was one time when alcohol was the first psychoactive substance that was demonized in society before your heroines and the cocaines and all of that stuff. Then you come down through the years for whatever reasons. Okay, people decided that prohibition didn't work. We still got drunkenness, people drinking illegally. Now we got a problem with organized crime. It's costing us a fortune to enforce these laws. And and we're still dealing with the same issues. They could no longer blame it on the immigrants, right? So when they came to terms with that, then it became an anti-prohibition movement. The same people who asked for it then rallied against it. And this is what we do today. It's the same thing over and over and over and over again. But again, these are the formative foundational issues that is the basis for individual alcohol consumption and abuse and all of that stuff. So we're going to keep going. This one was a little slow. I didn't want to make it long. I just wanted to be short and sweet and quick, cover the basics of it. And then tomorrow, well, we're going to talk. The next one I believe that we're dealing with is the pharmacology, the effects of alcohol on the brain and the body, which should be interesting. So I hope that you'll continue to watch and join us for these discussions while we're in this series on why people drink. I hope that you guys have a good night. And leave some comments and let me know what you're thinking about some of the things that we have discussed and talked about so far. And if you have any questions, this is important, guys. This is important stuff. It's not always popular and exciting and all of that, but this is important because we have situations like the case that we're covering for Marcella Chittister, where these children are getting killed because somebody got behind the wheel drunk. It's gonna happen again because this is what we're dealing with. This is a pervasive social problem. Alcohol abuse and dependence is a social problem. It has been going on for hundreds of years. It has not changed. So, what is the solution? Give me some feedback. Let me know what you're thinking. Let me know if you have any questions because I want to make sure that I answer them and respond to you as much as possible. I appreciate you taking the time to watch. Please take a moment and hit the thumbs up. Also, we have launched our membership channel membership program. Please consider becoming a channel member. You get some perks and all of that stuff. I believe the video is up for the ad and all of that. So take a look at that. And we will catch you guys. I am not going to go do the pharmacology on tomorrow. I believe it's Thursday. Friday night, we are on Discord for movie night. I'm going to post something. Please keep an eye on the community tab for information on that. We're watching a movie called Something's Wrong with Aunt Diane. It's a very tragic drunk driving case that happened out there in California. So these folks know I'm live. They're going to call me anyway. Anyway, this is what we are doing this week. So tomorrow I'm going to reschedule tomorrow's session on the pharmacology of alcohol for Saturday afternoon, early Saturday afternoon, probably around 11 o'clock or 12 noon. And then we'll probably close it out on Monday, dealing with toxicity and dependence. So I hope you'll join us and share the broadcast and all of that. And I appreciate you listening. I will see you guys on Friday night over on Discord. All right, and check the community again. Check the community wall for information and instructions on how to meet us over there for movie night. It should be fun and interesting to do that. All right, we'll see you next time. Take care. Enjoy more of our videos on the Community Advocate Network channel, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. If you would like to advertise your service, special announcement, or event, you may contact us at the Community Advocate Network at gmail.com. For community resources or services, visit our website at www.canmichigan.com.